So on this winter's morning, it is absolutely wonderful to have been invited to facilitate once again the media launch of the Bio-Africa Convention 2023 with the theme Reimagining Biotechnology Innovation for Africa's Development and Security. It's lovely to be here back again at the Innovation Hub in Pretoria. I'm really, really honored to be facilitating this eminent panel of speakers. And you see me, I'm protocolized, so I will need to highlight the fact that we do have the DG with us of Science and Innovation. DG, thank you so much for joining us and for leading us in this conversation. We really, really appreciate. And although in the program, I'm supposed to have somebody else first introduce the conference, we will be starting with DG. And I hope that is okay. Now, firstly, before we get into the conversation and I introduce the speakers, I just want to foreground this conversation on the context and framework that we find ourselves in as we reimagine biotechnology on this continent. Now, the AU really takes the issue of manufacturing biotechnology and positioning the continent as a biotech investment destination very, very seriously. And this is expressed in the new public health order, of which manufacturing is one of the essential 5 pillars of the new public health order, which was endorsed by the heads of state and government in the Assembly of 2021. Now, in 2021 as well, we launched, when I say we, this is the AU, launched the Partnership for Africa Vaccine Manufacturing, which has a target of producing 60% of the continent's vaccine requirements by 2040. Now, 2040 is not very far away. In addition, the heads of state and government, led by President Ramaphosa, were convened in May 2022 and published a communique on the 18th of May 2022. And this is very famously known as the 18th May 2022 communique. And here they said that we have to actually expand our vision and ensure that we are able to secure biotech continental capabilities by 2040 in full, not just for vaccines. And they called for the establishment of a manufacturing working group. This would be a high-level working group that ensures that the continent coordinates effectively to be able to actually secure biotech on the continent, for the continent and for the world. And I was very fortunate to be part of this process, which led us to launching a harmonized Africa manufacturing platform in partnership with the PAVM. And this was done at the World Health Assembly in Geneva this year. And this high-level working group, which is led by ministers of health of manufacturing countries and is joined by many stakeholders across the continent, which have a stake in manufacturing, like your outer NEPADs and your AFTCAs, the manufacturers themselves, and organized industry. It brings them together to ensure that we effectively coordinate. And they have expanded the target to say that we must be producing 60% of Africa's biotech requirements by 2040. This means that this community of biotech innovators has got a lot of work to do. We have set a very, very ambitious target, and this target must be met if we are going to assure ourselves of biotech security and not remain net importers of biotech. My name is Dr. Lwazi Manzi. I'm currently the head of Secretariat of the COVID-19 Commission, and we support President Ramaphosa in his role as the champion on COVID-19. I was also the spokesperson for the Minister of Health, and I have also been in the media and television industries. And of course, my background is as an emergency medicine practitioner. Now, it is my honor to introduce this panel. As I've already introduced the DG, I will move on to then say welcome to Dr. Siyabulela Ntutela. And Dr. Siyabulela Ntutela is Executive Vice President of Bio-African Strategic Partnerships. We hope to see the President very, very soon. He is on his way. Welcome. And it's also my pleasure to welcome a mentor, really, Dr. Boitumelo Semete. Thank you so much for coming back again this year. And Dr. Semete is, of course, the CEO of SAPRA, which is our health products authority. And it's also great on the virtual platform to have Dr. George Painter. Lovely to see you. Let's hope that we can get a visual of you. And to have Dr. Giorgio Rossino, who is also with us today. And I'm going to go into what all of these wonderful people do when we get to questions. And we also then have Dr. Chris Smith, but Dr. Chris Smith is best known as the Naked Scientist, whom we all listen to on Metro and other very popular radio stations. So welcome to all of you on the virtual platform. We really, really appreciate that you would be able to join us. Now I'm going to ask, before we get into a very, very interesting discussion, I think it's very important for us to understand what the BioAfrica convention is about, what the theme is, when it's going to be, just the nitty-gritties of the details, and what it is that we can look forward to. So I'm going to ask you, Dr. Ndutela, to then take us through and let us know what it is that we're in for this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Manzi, and good morning to everyone. We are here to talk about the BioAfrica Convention, our 6th annual convention for this year. And I welcome you and for being here and my panelists. I want to go much to welcome all of you. Convention for this year is again taking place South Africa on the 1st to the 6th of September. We moved it by a few weeks from the previous August take because of the BRICS summit that happening in the country. The convention this year is going under the theme of reimagining biotech innovation for African development security. The core behind that is that we want to get Africa to talk about the prevention for the pandemics, how to use biotechnology to make sure that Africa is able to sustain itself, Africa is able to respond to its own problems, but more importantly, the African continent is also able to address matters that are pertinent at present, such as security, medicine, and environmental protection. So the convention this year will be focused on those subjects. And the program is quite broad, as usual, with about 12 tracks, which will be talking on a number of issues such as the vaccine manufacturing in the continent. I think Dr. mentioned that it's critical to us in the BioAfrica that we are able to address it. Because one of the issues that are happening in the continent that are able to address needs using biotechnology in our IP. We'll be looking at issues that are addressing food security. I mentioned to you how to use biotech to address agricultural needs that the continent is facing, how to use biotech to address issues of biomanufacturing, how to use biotech to address issues of access to medicine for animals and so on. So the convention in this program will be addressing all those issues. We will be having our usual pre-convention courses, which will be led by our partners, such as the Emory University, where we'll be teaching our SMEs from the continent on a number of aspects of business and entrepreneurship. And our partners in Emory will be running those courses on the Friday before the convention on a Sunday. And we invite all of our SMEs to the continent to make sure that they participate in those programs. So over the years, they've proven very effective and very well attended by many SMEs in the continent. So we'll be having those again in the continent convention. We launched last year the Startup Stadium at Durban, which was great success. We had about 50 SMEs that we collected from all over the continent, came and showcased their innovations. And because our view is always that the African continent, so we have these innovations, but we've got to be able to find them and bring them to the center. So we will be growing up the Startup Stadium for this year, and we're hoping to have about 120 SMEs that will be showcasing them. We did the second Startup Stadium in Egypt, the Africa Excon, and it showed that there is actually a great need for these African startups to showcase to investors, to showcase to other big group of us. So in our convention this year in Durban, we will be growing that startup system. So we're inviting all of our SMEs that have an interest in showcasing their innovations in biotech to talk to AfricaBio and make sure that they're part of the startup systems, because as I said, we will be inviting a lot of investors from government, from abroad, and investors to come and listen to what is going to be done. We are thankful to our partners and sponsors who carried us over the years. The Department of Science Innovation, our DHC, they've supported this convention, and again, they will task this year to make sure that it grows to be Africa's core and main event in the biotech sector. Our Technology Innovation Agency will also supported us and partner with us in the convention. Will come on board again this year, and we have industry partners that are supporting us to bring big business into the biotech sector, the DPASA, and other industry formations that are continue to support us as a community. So we will be having those showcasing their innovation and supporting us in the programs. And we're very thankful that there's AfricaBio to make sure that it's not only in the government that supports us, but also big business that come on board. Registration will be open, opened already. It's opened yesterday, and urge all of our patrons to come and register at the website for the convention, www.bioafricaconvention.com, or go to africabio.com. It's open to all exhibitions, pavilions, and delegates that want to be part of that. So we invite all of you as media, as SMEs, academia, general industry, and government people to be part of this year's convention, and we intend to go bigger than it was in the previous years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was brilliantly done. With only a few minutes under your time. Thank you very much. And sounds like a jam-packed program. And I do want to just talk a little bit about the youth startup, because we were very fortunate that we were able to broker a deal to take that youth startup, an iteration of that, to the Egypt ExCon. And this was done through the COVID-19 Commission. And we were able to take some 30 youth startup to the Africa Health ExCon, which is the biggest biotech ExCon in Africa. And it was just so exciting. The environment, the excitement, the innovation, the incredible innovation that these startups came with was just so encouraging. And it really just gives you so much of hope for the biotech sector here in the continent. So I wanted to just bring that one out, just to say that we're really looking forward to seeing more and more innovation coming out from our youth startups here at the BioAfrica conference. Now, my apologies to Dr. Vuyisile Pehane. I realized that I did not mention him as part of the panel, and he's, of course, the executive of bioeconomy at the Technology Innovation Agency. So we'll be looking forward to talking about developing and innovating, particularly those who are entrants or who are growing inside the sector. Thank you so much for joining us. So DG, we are going to now kick off the conversation with you, the panel discussion. And DG, we have now, last year, we're still in the midst of a public health emergency of international concern. Since then, the DG of the WHO has declared the emergency over. Now, as a leader of innovation, what would you say are our primary areas of concern currently, now that we face as a country and as a continent, the real top highlights that we should be focusing on in terms of health security? And in particular, as your department, where are you placing emphasis and focus in terms of combating these very, very important health priorities? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dr. Lwazi. And thanks to Dr. Tutela from AfricaBio. We are extremely grateful for the partnership that we have with AfricaBio. Maybe before I respond to your question, Dr. Lwazi, why do we support a convention like this is coming? I think perhaps that might provide a context, and I'll share with you maybe 2 or 3 things that are keeping us awake at night to your 2 questions. The first one is we think we have a responsibility to invest as a Department of Science and Innovation in new technologies and see them through from the science capability, but also to look at potential applications for the challenges that we have in the country. So we are extremely, therefore, delighted to say that as part of our support to the convention, we would be supporting these bio-entrepreneurs that we've been supporting through the agency and through the Innovation Fund that we created about 2 or 3 years ago. I'll give just a little bit of numbers of how we managed to achieve that, but with the hope that we still will be able to talk more about that. The second one is something which we have been very successful working with the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development around beginning to look at biotech to modernize the agricultural sector. I'll say a few words about that and how we think that we probably showcase that at the convention. And then the third and the last one, which is closer to the question that you've asked, is in relation to now having learned from what happened during COVID to the last ones, how we've used that experience to try and build the capability, 2 capabilities in response to your question. The one is on the vaccine production, which is in line with the broader introduction that you made in terms of your role in the continent to support the president. And then the other one is how we think we need to start thinking about developing the capability for preparedness for the next pandemics. So on the vaccine, I'd like to indicate that as we all know, we were approached by the World Health Organization in 2021 to express an interest in the mRNA tech transfer in South Africa. So let me give you an update of where we are. And then, of course, in June 2021, we were announced as South Africa as a country that would create a hub working with other low, medium income countries and to be trained on this technology to produce vaccines. So as you know, the hub aims to support manufacturers in these low, medium income countries to produce their own vaccines and ensure that they have all the necessary operating procedures and the know-how for the manufacture of these vaccines. In South Africa, we have consortium members that are made up of Bigen, a company in Cape Town, South African Medical Research Council, Biotech, and a number of universities that are working together to try and develop the mRNA vaccines. The Bigen has been mandated to be the vaccine production technology company, and then MRC is to provide research funding, the management of clinical trials, and the governance of the consortium, whilst Biotech has been requested to develop the manufacturing scope, and then they train other identified companies in these low, medium income countries. Just to give you then an update on where we are, the 2021 in July, the facility is fully operational with good manufacturing practice at Bigen. And the first batches of COVID-19 mRNA vaccines have already been produced and tested in animal models. And the World Health Organization, with the support of the expert group, has selected 15 beneficiary companies in low, medium income countries to receive technology transfer of this hub from Bigen. And most of these 13 have received the initial training. Now, we all know that there are 2 or 3 companies of countries in Africa that have also developed this. So just to then see, as far as the mRNA technology for vaccine manufacturing, we think we are far ahead, and we are getting closer to the target that you've talked about to be able to to manufacture using this technology the COVID, but not only COVID, TB, HIV, and other vaccines. So we really think that this is a major achievement, and we will be more than happy at the convention, Dr. Tutela, to invite Afrigen and Biotech to talk about their experiences on how this can be put together, and perhaps share with the convention the other partners in the continent and how much training of this transfer is already happening. The second one on the vaccine that we want to talk about, but not loudly, we've identified consortia of universities and science councils in South Africa that have a capability in a virus-like particle platform. And we believe that with a clever way of putting the consortia that have the capabilities in this area, we will be able to produce a number of vaccines that are based on this platform. The one that we want to target is the Rift Valley fever. And as I've said, in the next months or so, the minister will probably be convening all the partners in the public sector and the private sector that will then be looking at the Rift Valley fever vaccine being produced in South Africa. We've got others that I will not talk about today, but we just want to say in this meeting, we believe that should be in a position in the next 5 years to have almost 50% of the vaccines that we import to South Africa being locally manufactured. So we're very excited. And then last, and then lastly on this area, we have, together with the National Research Foundation, looked at the competencies that we have to be prepared for the next pandemic. So we are establishing very soon a Center for Pandemic Preparedness. We've already consulted a number of universities and science councils that we think have the competencies to be able to play in this space. You know that through the investments that we made, we were able to set up this network for genomic surveillance, which was very, very useful during COVID, including the discovery of Omicron. So again, probably can give an update on where we are on this at the convention. I'm happy to talk about the startups, but I think maybe let's leave that to Dr.
Sure. Well, thank you, DG. Well, you've made it sound so easy. And I don't think anybody realizes quite the headwinds that we've been facing with this mRNA tech program, not least of the headwinds being a lack of faith in African capability to be able to do this. And, you know, every time I speak to, you know, the big farmers, we won't name them, and I say to them, you know, we have a target of 60% by 2040, they literally scoff in my face. They literally do. So DG, when I hear you say that we really do have the capability to do 50% already, you know, this makes me want to go, scoff right back. I told you so. So DG, thank you so, so much. And I'm going to take an opportunity, DG. You may be aware that one of the hats that I wear is that I'm leading Pillar 10 of the Presidential Compact. And we are actually having a workshop to finalize the contents of the second compact on Friday. Please send somebody to that workshop. I will remind you. Thank you so much. And I'm taking the opportunity to also just let others know that if you'd like to join that workshop, you're very welcome. It's an open workshop, and we're going to be dealing with pandemic preparedness for the country. Thank you very, very much, DG. Now, before we can do anything, somebody has to give us the permission to actually do what we say that we want to do and manufacture the drugs that we say we want to manufacture. And that person is Dr. Boitumelo Semete, Dr. Dumi. Can't do anything without her. She's the one that gives us the go-ahead to ensure that whatever products we inject or I expect people to ingest are safe and effective. So Dr. Dumi, please, can you walk us through the importance of a strong regulatory environment, because it is so very important. The progress that SAPRA has made, I mean, you've turned things around at SAPRA, you really have. And I think it would be really good for people to know exactly where you have taken it to and how you even leveraged. You really didn't waste a crisis. You really leveraged it and you managed to really jump some serious hurdles to get SAPRA to a very, very good space where it is now. And also, if you wouldn't mind touching on EMA, because it's not something that has been adequately socialized, where EMA is at now. EMA is the African Medical Authority, where it's at now, where the processes are at now, and why it's so important for us to actually have an EMA for the continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I was hoping I will run away from wearing the hat of a regulator today. And instead of the co-chair of the Africa Organizing Committee. But I guess when you're a regulator, you can't run away from such, right? Particularly in this very important conversation that we're having around enabling the biotech sector. I think I'm a scientist at heart, and hence one's involvement in such initiatives. You know, the DG speaks about the mRNA hub and how it's advanced over the last couple of years. And what we're recognizing as a regulator, and this is not unique to SAPRA, many regulators are recognizing this, is that we have to wear multiple hats. We can't only enforce and police.
Yeah.
In this very important continental intention and South African intention of manufacturing locally, we have to be an enabler. And this is written within our own strategy, even as SAPRA, to say that with initiatives of this nature, the regulator need to enable.
Yes.
So we've been engaging quite extensively with the Bigen and the Biotech and MRC team, and really providing guidance. Because what we recognize, and we've seen this also during COVID, is that as we get more and more local innovation and more products being developed, one of the critical issues is that we need to communicate very early on what the regulatory pathway is, what the roadmap is, so that the bio-entrepreneurs and industry is very clear on that. And again, because you know, in the sector there hadn't been a lot of manufacturing, and you know, innovators aren't always familiar with the regulatory pathway, we've had to put ourselves out there as SAPRA to say we're here to engage, and we continue to make that commitment. And even at the convention, we're hoping that we would have a session around regulators. I think African regulators have demonstrated that they are capable. We have now on the continent 5 regulators that have been benchmarked as being at maturity level 3, which means that these are well-functioning regulators that have the right systems in place to ensure that the products that we each consume are safe, quality, and effective. And a conversation that we're having among ourselves is, this is now the opportunity for African regulators to really stand up and support the sector, but also to find mechanisms to rely on each other. We've largely been looking at the West, the FDA, the likes of the European Medicines Agency, etc., which is great. But we now know that we have the capability to rely on each other. So we will be publishing, if we haven't published it yesterday, we've entered into an MOU with the Egyptian regulatory authority. And again, on the back of some of the conversations that happened at the African ExCon,
Yes.
we understand that there's strategic discussions happening between Egypt and South Africa around partnering around manufacturing. So we are positioning ourselves as SAPRA and the Egyptian Drug Authority to say, let's then, if the 2 regulators who are championing and supporting our countries in this, let's then partner to see how we can expedite access to products. So the issue of African regulators relying on each other is a critical one that I'm personally driving as the chair of the African Medicine Regulatory Harmonization Initiative. And this is an initiative you asked around the African Medicines Agency. And the question is, where are we? And an important acknowledgement is that it is not starting from scratch. There's already been a number of collaborative mechanisms under the African Medicine Regulatory Harmonization Initiative, wherein we have already started with joint inspections as different countries. We have already a platform for joint assessment of clinical trials. So AMA is being established from what already exists. It is, however, important because, again, it's a political instrument that we do need to ratify the treaty and understand that there's been positive progress for South Africa in the last few months. And I'm really excited that quite soon we hopefully will have the treaty ratified. Because as South Africa, there's been, and the AU has been very clear that they want South Africa at the table. They recognize the strength of the regulator, not only the regulator, but the strength of our industry. And because they've seen through platforms like BioAfrica, wherein we showcase some of our manufacturers, they've seen what some of the engagements that big companies like Aspen have been able to do, but also they've seen other smaller entities, right, such as AfricaBio with their diagnostics, such as Medical Diagnostic with their HIV test. So there is an acknowledgement that there's a significant growth in the sector in South Africa, and they want South Africa at the table. And so we're really excited. They will quite soon be appointing the board of AMA. They've put out terms of reference for that, and the board will then be appointing the DG of AMA. And the intention is that priority products for the continent would first be reviewed under this mechanism. And what that does is it expedites access. So once you have AMA having reviewed products, by the time they come to the country, the local regulator just makes sure that they are compliant with local requirements. Now you can imagine, as we have this conversation around local manufacturing and they intend to procure 60% of products which are locally manufactured, you do need a mechanism such as AMA to fast track access to this. And so for us, it's quite an exciting time for regulators. And, you know, we always say we don't want to put a crisis to waste, and we haven't put the COVID crisis to waste. We have learned a lot. We have learned the benefit of collaborating, not only as regulators, but even with our scientific community. And so even as Dr. Tutela mentioned, even at the conference, we will have the R&D sector there, we will have regulators there. They are critical to a well-functioning sector. We also have acknowledged the need for us to be agile and flexible, and to recognize that at the end of the day, we are African regulators and we need to enable Africa. Yes, there's global standards to comply to, and we certainly want to do that. But the fact remains that we are African regulators and we must enable. And then just two last points is around why would you want to have a strong regulator? And it's really not just about us enforcing and only public safety, which is critical. I mean, we saw during COVID that there were decisions that the regulator made that were challenged at time, but we stood our ground because we're an evidence-based organization. And we can say with certainty that every single product that we authorize, yes, with every product, we're sitting in a room with scientists, so you all understand that with every product, there are risks, there are side effects, you get that. But we could have a safe public. And I always say in South Africa, you never go to a store, purchase paracetamol, and you wonder whether, is it truly paracetamol? Is it going to do what it's going to do? It's because you've got a strong regulator that ensures compliance. But with that said, there's an acknowledgement that the sector also wants to export. So when you then have strong regulators, they can be trusted by other markets. We saw during COVID that Aspen did the fill and finish of the Janssen vaccine. And where did it go? It was in the UK, it was in Europe, because they could trust the decision that SAPRA made. And so that for me is quite critical to say, as an enabler, we must make sure that globally, products that are manufactured in South Africa cannot be questioned. Everyone can know that they are safe and effective. And then lastly, we need to ensure that we build capacity on the continent around regulatory system strengthening, and we're working very closely with the PAVM, the Pan-African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative, and they're very intentional also around supporting all of us to ensure that we've got capacity. So at the end of the day, it's really about the value chain, and we want to ensure that we can enable the value chain.
Well, thank you so much. I love the principle of enablement, because you can see that it's really driven a lot of the reformations and the progress that has been made in the regulatory space. And at the end of the day, as you say, it really boils down to trust. It boils down to trust and confidence in the product, you know, not only for individuals, but for populations, for nations. you know, and other groups of people. So I'm really, really glad that I brought you back to the regulatory space, because I saw in the program it was sidestepped, and I said, no, we can't, because this is a very, very critical element. And it's a critical element in terms of market shaping, you know, which is super critical. And we're going to come back to market shaping. And DG, I just want to warn you that I'm coming back to that bit for you. So, and also actually, let me also warn Dr. Wiesler that I'm going to actually also deal with that bit with you as well on the market shaping side of things. But let's step over into the virtual platform. And welcome our speakers on the virtual platform. We're so happy that you be able to join us. We're going to start with Dr. George Painter, as I previously alluded to. He's from Emory University. Now, Dr. Painter has been part of some very, very important innovations in terms of COVID-19 medical countermeasures, having been involved in the development of one of the very first oral therapeutics. And collaborates very closely with the South African University and companies on developing therapeutics as well. And so, Dr. George, collaboration, coordination and collaboration are the big themes when it comes to innovation. And I think I would like to find out from you, with those principles, how have you been able to advance your innovations, and particularly, how have you been able to enable the continent to be able to onboard the technologies and propagate the technologies really within the continent for continental security? Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
And I think you're muted, so if somebody could unmute you. Thank you so much. There, we can hear you now.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, the conversation is quite interesting because the theme of integrating all of the capabilities into a functional entity that can respond quickly to an emerging disease. And I think that's the general theme. There is quite a good surveillance network throughout the continent. And I think that's the first and most fundamental element. The sooner you understand what's emerging, the more time you have to respond. And I think setting up interactions between universities, as the DG mentioned, because that allows you, no matter how innovative you might be or how functional of a research or drug discovery group you might have, you can always force multiply and leverage your capability by close interactions with other universities that have other elements that are necessary to be sewn together in a functional manner to develop a drug. I think that's quite important. And I'm actually quite impressed over the years working with various universities in South Africa. All the elements are there, all of them. All of the capabilities are there. And of course, from my perspective as a virologist, there's a great deal of understanding of all aspects of the emergence, understanding of the pathogenesis and treatment of viral disease. And I think the last point that Dr. Toomey brought up, and what was really important during the emergence of COVID, was the availability of real-time interaction with regulators around the world, which happened for us, of course, in the United States with the FDA and in the UK. And of course, ensuring the safety of a drug and its utility. You know, antivirals are necessary in a pandemic. Obviously, the greatest public health benefit comes from vaccination, but in the United States, for example, 25% of the population potentially can mount a neutralizing immune response because of various comorbidities, medical suppression of immune response for various reasons. So adding in antivirals, understanding their safety, interacting with regulators to ensure safety, and getting them online in a timely fashion. Because in these emerging diseases, who goes first? The most vulnerable. So you have to be ready for that. And I think I'm excited because I think all the elements are there. I think you have them all. And we at Emory, we're looking forward to participating because we brought essentially a biotech company inside of a university. The reason for that was that we could interface with universities around the world much more easily than a company. I share your cynicism working with large international pharmaceutical companies. I won't mention names, but I'm doing it now, and it's difficult. So I think that having the network made up of interested parties inside the country is essential.
Yeah, we had actually a very interesting conversation with Dr. Msomi about the proximity of biotech companies with universities and other academic institutions. It's so important. Luckily nowadays, we have digital tech voice over IP maybe to help, but I still think that there's definitely, as you have pointed out, huge value in ensuring that really there's a very, very close working relationship, closeness between those who are manufacturing and those who have the evidence to drive that manufacturing. And in fact, it's something that we spoke about as we were dealing with this issue of pandemic preparedness, because as you correctly say, the elements are all there, but the trick is that surge response, and that surge response cannot wait. We saw during COVID that every day lost trying to raise money, figure out what to do the R&D, etc. Even though we did it very quickly, it was still too long. It was too long. A year was too long. We lost millions of lives during that time. So we've got to ensure that those elements are as prepared as they possibly can be for a surge response, and that there is day one capability ready and waiting to actually deal with the surge response. So thank you very much for that. That was really, again, you pointed to this issue of, it's not so much the elementary issues that are the problem, it's the issue of close and effective collaboration. Let's go to you, Dr. Giorgio Rossino. Speaking of collaboration, let's take it to a higher level. I think those of us at the technical level are pretty good at collaborating, but then it goes higher and higher, and then you find that there's politics, geopolitics, economic politics that comes in the way. So I have two questions for you, Dr. Rossino. You're one of the world's leading innovators on diagnostics and therapeutics for infectious diseases. In particular, you're very well known for medical countermeasures against TB. You were the co-founder of the Global Alliance Against TB and the founder for innovative new diagnostics Find. My sister Yodi is of course now the chair of that. And you were also part of developing the Gene Expert. So I want to ask you, the high-level meeting on ending TB is finally being picked up again. Since 2019, we left off at UNGA and we all said we're going to end TB in 2023. I think it was the targets. And it's 2023 now. Okay, fine, we had the COVID-19 pandemic and all that. I just have one question for you. What message do you have for the heads of state and government when they have this meeting now in September? And then the second part of your talk, if you could please talk about the launch of the new African Product Development Partnership as part of the Durban Declaration at the 2023 Africa Convention. If you could just expand on that, because that sounds like a very exciting initiative. But I would really love to know the first part of the question. What would you like to say? Because I'm going to take what you say to at least our head of state, since I have that proximity. and it would really be good to land a very, very practical message that will maybe even make its way to the high political declaration. Thank you, Dr. Rossino.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, very exciting question you are asking me. And I'm very happy to to answer your first question, concerning TB, and I think there has been a lot of progress made in TB in general. But when we really look at the reality of it and take into account the fact that COVID-19 in the last 3 years has made the slowdown of the overall global advances we had in the last 10 years in TB, we still are counting today 10 million new TB cases, 1.6 million deaths per year, which is one of the most devastating disease of mankind. Now, when we look at what is missing, there are 3 key issues that are missing in TB. Really, the first one, in my view, having been in the diagnostic of TB, I strongly believe that we really need the point of care TB test, which is very similar to the HIV rapid test that is now manufacturing, as Tumi was saying, in South Africa also. But we need something that community healthcare workers can identify patients when they go and visit them in the countryside or wherever it is. But that delay is very important. That would allow us to democratize the diagnostic of TB and bringing the diagnostic really very near to where the patient is. And the other thing really, which is the elephant in the room in TB, is the fact that we really need a vaccine. We have all seen the scandal, not the scandal, the great success of having developed a vaccine for COVID, for a viral disease, which not very easy, in fact, to develop in 1.5 years, and vaccinating a huge amount of people all over the world. And the last vaccine for TB is more than 100 years old. There is the BCG, and doesn't have any protective immunity for adult people, apart from small population, the children. So diagnostic and vaccine is very important. And the fact that we cannot really forget that TB is still a very critical disease, and the moment you forget about it, it rebounds back. And this has come in the history many times, during World War and during COVID-19. You see, immediately as you leave it go, it will really overgrows it. So don't leave any stone unturned about TB, but don't forget the rapid test and the new drugs. Really, that's the third point. We still need a new drug to shorten the period of treatment. Now, let me say something about my dream now about the African Product Development Partnership that we have in mind, and what has driven us, and what was the reason why we think that we need that. And and it comes with the fact that you just mentioned, Chairperson, also, and Somi was telling me so great things and about the Cairo meeting, where we have seen that there is a substantial opportunity and a great potential to apply innovative and entrepreneurial solution in response to the changing public health environment in Africa. And there is a lot of young enthusiasm around that, and a lot of startups, and so many things are happening. And that's one point. On the other hand, we have local manufacturing in Africa. We had heard from you, from the DG, from everyone else, and from the African Union, how much effort has been put into enhancing local manufacturing in Africa, mainly vaccines, but irrespective of what, but certainly there's been a drive for local manufacturing. I have been really a champion about local manufacturing, collaborating with WHO in many initiatives. I wrote the pharmaceutical development plan for Ethiopia, together with another South African consultant with me. And what I'm saying is that when we look at local manufacturing in Africa, it has happened a lot around it. There is a lot of local manufacturing happening, but if we look at the real value chain in R&D, local manufacturing in Africa stops at the level of producing drugs that goes into the market. There is, from the pharmaceutical industry point of view, not really serious effort to work into research and development. Most of the research and development comes from initiative coming from the North, from America, from Europe. And what we do in Africa is clinical trials. We develop part of it. We do some of the development, but the originator is always happening somewhere else. So because I've been involved with public-private partnership, I created the Global Alliance for TB Drug Development, the Foundation for Innovative Diagnostics. And together with John Nkengasong, that I consider one of the greatest visionary about public health in Africa, we created the African Society for Laboratory Medicine. We came out with the fact that we need to accelerate the research and development in Africa. We need to have groups in Africa, not only manufacturing vaccines of good quality to export. We need people in Africa because we have scientists that are really at global level. They're high quality scientists. We have just heard from George Painter now. Certainly there is that, but we are not able to do the translational step. We have these scientists, but we don't have the capacity to give the scientists the opportunity to develop new products, and then a pharmaceutical industry or diagnostic industry capable of translating those great ideas into products. So it just as happened with the Global Alliance, IAVI, and so many other public-private partnerships in Europe, we thought that there is no such initiative for Africa. And so the idea was, we launched last year, we had a great consensus around the idea of creating an African development product partnership that has 3 objectives. And I will very quickly go through this, Chair, and give me just the last 10 seconds. So the first objective is to foster the collaboration in health products development between African Public Health Research Institute and the private sector, and African private pharma. So this collaboration should be fostered. And one can really imagine this around regional incubators, like what the DG was just telling us about the hub for vaccine in South Africa, which could be the regional incubator for creating capacity in the whole region, in the sub-region of this Southern African region around that, and doing the same thing in East, in West Africa, and in North Africa. Just following a little bit the vaccine manufacturing plan that was from the African CDC and the African Union. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to really start imagining to fund African-led and owned R&D bankable projects aligned and focused at product development for local health needs. And this, this is something that would need the African Development Bank, but also the major funder agencies that now start funding no more research done in Europe or in America, but really the fundamental research to start projects in Africa and then led into an African product at the end. And the third part of it is, the third objective is to advocate for increased investment and priority-driven health product R&D on the continent. And this is what AfricaBio has been doing last year, and that's what we plan to do this year. Thank you very much for the time.
Wow, thank you so much. That is so exciting. And I'm glad that you mentioned Africa CDC, because I was going to say that this initiative definitely needs to closely collaborate with the PAVM, as well as with this new high-level entity working group, the Harmonized Africa Health Manufacturing Platform. I believe that actually, and this is also definitely very quiet in the media launch, but I do believe that there's actually going to be an inaugural meeting of this entity later in the year in October. So I think I must actually connect you with the colleagues in Africa CDC, because I think this initiative, this issue of R&D, there's 2 issues for me that are very critical for us to address: the issue of R&D and the issue of market shaping, as I've previously mentioned. So I think with this particular initiative, I think it takes care of the issue, but now it's a matter of collaborating with these bodies. So this is very exciting. I would also like to pick out your 3 messages, which I think are absolutely critical for the ending TB. And I certainly think that these issues should make their way into the high-level declaration. Invest in point-of-care diagnostics, invest in vaccines for TB. So it's the issue of medical countermeasures. I know that there is language that pertains to medical countermeasures currently in the drafts. However, I think that this needs to actually be quite specific and quite intentional in its approach to ending TB. And of course, the fact that, you know, you must never forget about TB, I think that is an absolutely critical issue, especially because we know that TB certainly has got this propensity for resistance every time that it flares up. So I think that these three are actually super critical, and I'll certainly do what I can to ensure that these messages actually do land where they need to land. So thank you so much for that very provocative intervention, which we always love it when there's provocation. So we now are going to come to you, the naked scientist, Dr. Chris Smith. Lovely to have you. And what we'd like you to talk about, one thing that you're very good at is you're good at communications. You are good at stripping down the science and making it, because at the end of the day, we do this for people. We do this for your grandmother, your mother, your brother, your sister, who just want to be healthy and they want to be able to live a good and productive life. And so when we start to speak of biotech, you know, we've always got very fancy language that we throw around each other, and that's fine. But when we've got to strip it down and make it relevant to the ground, this is what you are really genius at. And so this is what we'd really like you to talk about is how do you, when you, and in your communications and in your interactions with various sectors from top to the bottom, how do you strip it down? How do you ensure that it's relevant? How do you ensure that things are vertically integrated and that the message actually penetrates down to the stakeholders and the sectors that they go down to? And then I see that there was a question on the issue of the interconnectivity of medicine, as it were, and medical countermeasures and nutrition. And when I saw this question, I was excited because just the other day, I was watching I think it was on YouTube. I don't know how I came across it, but I was watching a company, a startup that is harvesting crickets to make cricket flour. And there were restaurants that were using that cricket flour to mix it in with just normal wheat flour, but the nutritional value just shot up, you know. And I see that here that there is a question on innovating around nutrition and looking at sources of nutrition, you know, that are both good for the environment and good for us as well. And we may not have thought about that. So I would like you to actually talk about that intersection within biotech between medical countermeasures and nutrition. It's something that's also very of interest to our head of state as well, is, you know, how do we bring these things together? How do we ensure that we actually are quite cohesive about the approach of biotech in its entirety? Thank you so much.
Well, good morning, and thanks very much for inviting me aboard. And I thought the previous discussions were absolutely fascinating and really hit the nail on the head in terms of where we are. There are some enormous opportunities across the African continent, but with opportunities come challenges. And they're the same challenges that confront the entire world, actually, but they're going to become very focused and very acute in the African continent in the years ahead. Probably the most important one is going to be population. Because if we look at the rest of the world's population has risen vastly. In the 2 decades or so that I've been a medical doctor and a virologist, the world population has gone from about 6 billion to about 8 billion, so 30%. And most of that rise has happened in the Far East, in Asia. And the consequences have been pretty inevitable. If we look at what that's done to the way we tend to live, the way we tend to move, the way we tend to farm and therefore feed ourselves, what we're doing is intensifying the risk that we will succumb to more events like COVID. And if you look at the frequency with which events like COVID have happened, that rate has gone up. And there's no arguing that the rate at which this is occurring is accelerating. So the risks are rising. And the risks are rising because as the number of people increases, the number of opportunities for things to spread amongst us increases. As people travel more, and in fact, if we froze time right now, you'd find there's about 1.5 million people airborne around the planet at any moment in time. And as people travel more, where they go, their germs go. And no city really is more than 24 hours from any other. That's well under the incubation period of the average infectious disease. And then we've got the question of how we feed ourselves and where we live. Well, as we increase our population, we bring ourselves into closer and closer proximity and therefore conflict with nature, because we need somewhere to live, and we tend to build our houses where there aren't houses, and that generally means often virgin rainforest in the tropics. And we build farms in the same sorts of environments in order to meet our hungry population's needs. And the results of this are opportunities for bugs and things to jump out of the natural world and into the human world. And this is going to become very, very, very focused in the African continent in the years ahead, because the Asian sector of the world has increased its population, and that may now be stabilizing. But the predictions are that in the African continent, the population may double in sub-Saharan Africa, going beyond 2.5 billion people by mid-century. This is a wonderful opportunity in some respects, because other sorts of technologies being brought to bear mean vast increases in investment. There's a lot of labor and skilled pairs of hands that can be brought against problems. But equally, those same challenges that have led to the emergences of diseases in Asia, like COVID, will intensify the risk in the African continent. But it will also bring with it other challenges which are only just beginning to be realized in terms of how significant they are. And those really are things like you just mentioned, food security, and also climate change. And climate change will drive us together. It will drive us into more conflict with animals, and it may also jeopardize, or almost certainly will jeopardize, our ability to produce food, because the amount of livable land area will reduce. Therefore, we will move, animals will move, and the areas we can grow our food is almost certainly going to become more restricted. So we're going to be needing a lot of science and scientists to solve these problems. And it's very, very good that enormous emphasis is being placed on these problems and coming up with African solutions to these problems that will occur on African soil and will cause problems for countries in Africa. Much better to anticipate their coming and have an equipped population who can deal with those problems head on, because they're equipped with the science, the technology, and the education. And you asked me to talk about communication. Well, that's where it all begins, because nothing happens if you can't communicate those things and those challenges and those aspirations. Starting right at the bottom end, a young person who's a young learner today learns because they have a good teacher, and no one forgets the name of their first teacher. And it's a fact that those people make the biggest influence on us throughout our lives. And
Mrs. Armitage.
and it's absolutely critical that communication is prioritized from that young age. But then when those people grow up, and as they grow up and go through the educational system, what are they going to turn into? Well, if we want them to become scientists, if we want them to become technologists, if we want them to become business entrepreneurs investing in those technologies, and we want them to go into hospitals and work as medics and doctors and nurses and so on, we need those people to know about those opportunities now. We need them to have the education so that they can apply for those opportunities now. And that again comes down to communication. And when people become professionals in those spaces as doctors, nurses, scientists, technologists, entrepreneurs, they need to be ambassadors for their subject and also capable of communicating the scale of the problem they're trying to surmount to recruit others to come and help them, and also encourage others to go into sectors of education and subsequently higher education so they can join the fight against those things. And this all comes down to communication. So we ignore communication at our peril. And one of the things that I've been striving to do for a long time, and thanks to AfricaBio, we did it very successfully in the last 12 months off the back of a conference in Durban in 2019, which was the last chance we got to do this before COVID came. But we brought a young South African researcher, a very promising young South African researcher, to the University of Cambridge and gave her 2 months of intensive training in how to be a really good communicator. She was good already, but she's really, really very good now. We made radio programs about her science, TB, very relevant to the previous speaker, and we've now dispatched her back to finish her PhD and also go into industry in South Africa, and therefore help to give back to the community and give back to society what she works on, how she works on it, and hopefully nurture the next generation of people like her. And I think this is something we're aspiring to do in the years ahead as well. So I hope that's thought-provoking, but also encourages people not to give up. There are challenges, but with challenges come great gains.
Well, thank you so much. That's really, really exciting about that kind of person that you're training. We need more of those. I wish I had gotten that training, because when I was thrown into politics, I just had to bring the sum total of my experiences into the communication space. And I could have definitely done with the training, because the first thing I had to communicate was NHI, and the second thing I had to communicate was COVID. So, so we really, really need more of those, because indeed, when you are able to actually have somebody who's that nexus between the communications and the technical work, it really makes the world of difference. You know, this clarity of thought and this bird's eye overview of what you have given us as really a glimpse into the future of what we must be considering. You know, it's really just outstanding, and really thank you for that one. And it segues beautifully into Dr. Pehane's issues that he's going to tackle with us, because this is now where, as TIA, you step in. He said we're going to need a lot of people to help solve these problems. You are the space where you incubate these kinds of people, and you incubate innovation. And so we'd like to know then that, in view of what our good colleague has just said, what do you see as the trends on the development and implementation of bioeconomy strategies, both for the continent and around the world? And also, where do you see the opportunities then for Africa in industrializing biotechnology? And then, as I said, let's deal and let's tackle with the issue of market shaping. We've spoken now about R&D, manufacturing, the enablers for manufacturing, investment into manufacturing. But unless Africa has the market, we can forget about this agenda altogether, because it will simply collapse on its way towards the targets that we are envisioning. We know, let's talk about an issue that happened right here in this country. We know that we have this BioVac scenario. We're in the context of a very, very bold market shaping commitment that we have made for preferential procurement on the continent. We were still, as a country, not able to preferentially procure even from our very own the state-owned enterprise. Now, these are the hard conversations that we have to have, because when you talk about market shaping, it's not going to be helpful to say, oh yes, we must open up the market to Africa. We have got to actually be very bold. The heads of state were bold, and they said to Gavi, give us 30%. And then Gavi set up this AMC. We still have to push them to get to the 30%. We're now going to the other guys, the global funds, and PEPFARs and all of that. And we also said to them, give us 30%. You know, we have to go to all of our member states, and we also have to say to them, give us the market. And then we have to go now, we've seen just now that BRICS has launched a pharma. We must go to them, and we must also say, give us so much, you know, give us 30%, 50%, whatever the case may be, right? And then at some point we have to go to the rest of the world, other countries, especially those countries that have very, very high populations. Whilst we understand that China and India can probably take care of their own needs, if they're going to be part of BRICS, they must actually then be part of our agenda as well, and they must give us the market as well. Now, how do we go about this boldly, but without, you know, causing geopolitical uproar at the same time? How do we balance our bold visions to ensure that, you know, our new innovators that we are incubating do find a market when they actually get out there? And DG, I'm going to ask you to elaborate when he's done as well. So we'll come straight back to you on this one. Thank you very much.
Super, thank you very much. So, of course, none of this would be possible without the creation of these innovations in people's minds. This is in essence what encapsulates what we call intellectual property. So our role as TIA is really to identify the developers of these ideas, the owners of this IP, to fund them. In essence, we occupy an unrivaled space in our national system of innovation, in the innovation ecosystem, which is to de-risk these innovations and make them attractive for follow-on funding, whether it be government, ourselves, or even private sector, venture capital and private equity. This is really our role as the Technology Innovation Agency. And so when we go about doing our business as TIA, we certainly need to understand what is going on around the world as well, because ultimately it makes no sense for us to make these large investments and there be no market for the uptake of these products. So I'll get to the issue of the BioVac example just now. But ultimately, we do this with the end in mind, understanding that there will be a requirement for these opportunities to be attractive to the market and so be commercializable. And for this reason that we also have a commercialization division within the organization. But of course, we're taking care of entrepreneurs. And so we have an innovation enabling division, which in essence looks at the entrepreneur, the environment, the ecosystem around the entrepreneur, and how we can support the entrepreneur, whether it is access to international markets, soft landing programs, incubation, acceleration, whatever it might be. All of these considerations we make in understanding what needs to be done to support the innovator. And so when we look at what we do around the world, we've seen, I think they're just under 60 or so bioeconomy strategies around the world. What this means is that us as South Africa, us as Africans need to be thinking about how we compete with other nations around the world. The decadal plan is in essence a step in the right direction. And I'm glad to report with the greatest of confidence that much that has happened as far as the decadal plan is quite ahead versus a number of countries, even developing countries around the world, when actually we've put in place, in essence, an implementation plan for our own bioeconomy strategy. This is very important, colleagues, that we recognize this advance that's made by our Department of Science and Innovation. And I'd like to commend the DG for his leadership as far as that is concerned. But it also means, of course, colleagues, that we go about our business and we understand what the markets and the world looks like. Getting those products into the market, local market, of course, requires us to think about procurement systems, to think about the markets themselves, regulatory bodies and so forth, to assist with the uptake of these products. What it means is that the communication systems, communication methods must be, in essence, thinking about the end user. Who is the end user? And recognize, what we call the end user pressure, I suppose, and the demand by the user for high quality products, useful products that actually address a particular need. Very, very important to all considerations that we make as the Technology Innovation Agency. But of course, the market doesn't only end in South Africa. There's the continental market, recognizing that there are over 1 billion people on the African continent. And so when we look at these opportunities, as a country, as a continent, we should certainly be thinking of Africa first as the first market for innovations. As we've quickly recognized, of course, that the world is not readily acceptable and ready to buy African products unless certain, I suppose, criteria have been met. One of them being, of course, regulatory, and of course, the product quality and so forth. And so when we look at, and I'll hand over to Dee just to expand on this one here, but I sit on the board of the BioVac Institute as well. And this particular matter came up where we're saying, here we are, as a South African entity, we're in essence very competitive on the African continent, in the country. We manufacture these vaccines very well. And here's an opportunity for us to participate in a government tender. We've long been speaking about a provincial procurement. We're speaking about local production and supporting local production. And in fact, the president has gone around the world saying that this is what we will be doing as a country. And so when this, the outcome of this recent tender by the Department of Health came out, we will certainly, of course, found ourselves at a disadvantage, in essence, having to compete with people on the basis of price. And so the scientists in us, of course, will have to look at these kinds of things, and we'll still quickly recognize that which the BioVac Institute had to offer in terms of the quality of the vaccines was actually superior to what we're seeing being brought to the country. But of course, it's just unfortunate that the way our regime is structured is just that we look at price as the determinant of these tender awards. And so this is something, of course, that we will certainly be looking at as a country, as government, and of course, as the African continent, to make sure that we ourselves, when we fund these innovations, we support innovations, we give them to the market, we ourselves are seen to be the buyers of our own products. Certainly, if we're not buying our own products, I don't see how we can expect other people around the world to be buying these products. If we're able to demonstrate just in terms of the impact of our innovations on our continent, how do you expect people from the rest of the world to buy into these particular products. And so it's been a very exciting journey for myself personally, with my colleagues, both within TIA and of course within the country, recognizing, of course, as the colleague said, that the strength of our research institutions, our higher education institutions, our science councils, private sector, SMEs and so forth, that science base is very, very strong. It is competitive. It is global. We can compete on the global stage. We do publish in high impact journals anywhere around the world, Nature, Science, whatever it might be. So there's really no reason for us as Africans not to be able to successfully translate these innovations into products that are useful and beneficial for us on the African continent. And so I'd like to leave it at that, to say that, the future is bright for us as Africans. We certainly must look to ourselves to fund ourselves, support ourselves, whether it be through infrastructure, support of science, engineering, technology skills, to support women coming into this particular space, of course, and to address, of course, the opportunities presented by private equity, by venture capital, and to capitalize on these, and to draw these industry partners into platforms such as the BioAfrica Convention, because this is really where we want to demonstrate the role of private sector in our national system of innovation. Thank you very much.
No, it couldn't have been put more brilliantly. And what I like about the way you've tackled this issue is that you have quite clearly pointed out a very clear policy stance that we have taken, not just as a country, but as the continent. And that's the thing about policy. You make the policy, then you've got to find a way of following through. You can't hide behind legislative framework or whatever. You must innovate around it. But DG, as I come back to you, let me just give you two kind of triggers to deal, because I really do want us to deal with this issue. And at BioAfrica, we have to deal with this issue, and we must deal with it decisively. And there must be recommendations that come out of it. First of all, is that in terms of preferential procurement, certainly for South Africa, we actually do have the legislative framework. Now, how do we ensure that when you have a policy position, that those who are expected to find expression in that policy are able to invoke the provisions that are there that you can invoke? Because I think that's the trouble. The trouble is that a lot of the people that deal with these things are high, sort of senior technical level kind of people. They're not necessarily legal people who are going to go around mining for those provisions. They will follow the PFMA maybe to the letter without really looking deep into it. So we also need to provide them with that capability of being able to express a policy that may not necessarily be aligned with their understanding of public finance management. So that's the first aspect. The second aspect of market shaping, as he said, is the issue of the premium. Now, the issue of the premium is going to be a reality for African products. That's just, we must just accept that, right? And I think that perhaps our issue is that we haven't taken some firm policy decisions and therefore made policy proclamations of how we're going to deal with the premium. And the issue of dealing with the premium is that in the same way that we're innovating for the product itself, we also have to actually innovate for the financial arrangements around the product. So that means that we're going to have to actually blend the financing of premiums. So I would love for you to also just touch on that. And then as somebody who is in the senior space, how should we be advancing policy discussions of this, and where do you think they're best placed for us to ensure that they move forward into policy positions and finally into law?
Thanks very much again, Razi, and to the fellow panelists. The first one, I apologize that I will talk about what we're doing in South Africa, but it could serve as a basis for how the rest of the continent could do this. We've convened 4 departments in South Africa. We use the fact that we are a Department of Science and Innovation. So we've made other departments not to feel guilty, but to say innovation means we have to do things differently.
Yes.
We've invited the Department of Health, the National Treasury as the custodian of the public procurement, Department of Health as the procurer of health products, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition and ourselves. So it's a task team made up of these 4 departments. So what is the problem statement? Problem statement, as you say, is that if we assume that we've got the capability and the entire value chain for producing vaccines, if you can't land them in a market that makes economic sense, your R&D and everything that you do, sorry to me, you can have the regulatory, you can have the product, but unless you have that market, you will not get any. Very exciting discussions, but we have agreed in principle with the Department of Health that they can look at the current legislation and their procurement policy, and it could be amended to have a spread of where the products are coming from, including local productions. However, we understood from their perspective that they also want to manage risk. So what it means is that if you procure from one supplier, if for any reason something goes wrong with that supplier, you could find yourself in a shortage of particular vaccines at a point in time. So they say they sometimes deliberately procure from different suppliers as long as the product is the same. So we were sympathetic to that, and we've said, okay, let's park that. And then the second department, the National Treasury, has agreed to amend the PFMA. In fact, we are in South Africa, it's the discussions around how do you in the PFMA allow for local production and have a law that, of course, will make sure that for local production, there is space within this legal system to do that. And then the third department is the Department of Trade and Industry. Why are we bringing them in? Is the point you've made around how do you then finance so that the premium that we have to pay upfront is reduced? Because what sometimes we don't know, this is a very hidden way in which different countries support their companies at home. And hence we think the final product is cheaper. When in actual fact, there are incentives that are given by the company so that the price is competitive. So they have agreed to design a set of incentives in this area of health innovation that will help us to bring the price premium down. So that's the first thing we've done. This team has agreed, it's been convened by ministers, and ministers are expecting a report. I have to. And then the second one that we have then done after these principles have been agreed is we've commissioned the what is called in South Africa, the Government Technology, no, it's the Government Technical Advice Services, GTEC, to look at the market numbers. So these numbers are not only the amount of money we're paying on vaccines, but also if we design this package of incentives, what would the market be? So that we don't speak generally, but we speak with specific numbers. So they would be producing this report for us perhaps in the next 2 to 3 months. And then we can then look at, does it make economic sense to produce vaccines in South Africa, maybe for the rest of the continent as well, and the rest of the region. So we're expecting that to be finalized. And then the last conversation that we've started is with Gavi, now called the Global Alliance, as you all know. They procure on behalf of UNICEF vaccines for 83 countries. And they've reminded us something that I didn't know, that South Africa is one of the investors in the country.
Yes.
And we are supposed to have a position at the board of them. Now, the importance of that is that if they are buying these vaccines for the rest of, or some of the countries in the continent, we need to work with them so that they also seem to have some numbers in terms of what percentage could be bought. So I think it's also a very important partner in this discussion around advanced market commitment. So there's this work in progress. I'm not so sure how far we would have gone by the time of the convention, but we would be more than happy. I think, Dr. Tutela, there is a regulatory market development slot, so we'd be more than happy in an appropriate, I'm not vying for talking, but I'm sure either myself or my deputy, Dr. Rakeshni Ramocha Krisel, will be more than happy update us where we are on this, but we think it's excellent development in South Africa, but hopefully for the rest of the continent as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad Dr. Msomi is here, because Dr. Msomi, this issue really does need to go into the program. It is so, so critical. We were talking here about market shaping and what the things that need to be done, market shaping. And DG, I wanted to ask you the question because I was aware of the progress that's been made, but I want people to be reassured that it is something that as government, you're very much alive to, and that there is a lot of work that's been done. But I also just wanted, I did precisely want you to give the African example so that we do actually have something that can be propagated across the continent. Not to say that the continent hasn't been doing this kind of thing. I was speaking to a former Minister of Health from Rwanda, and they already 10 years ago had already said that they will absorb up to 10% more of kind of the base price or the market price, you know, as part of this. So they already had actually said those things. And we were having this discussion, which is also another very, very provocative kind of person. And she's really very, very passionate about us pushing this issue of market shaping, legislated preferential procurement, innovating around absorbing the premiums, because we're going to need to do this for the next 10, 20 years before we can be properly competitive in the markets. So thank you very, very much to all of the panelists. This was an absolutely exciting and fascinating conversation. There are audience members here. I don't know if there's anybody on the virtual platform, but I wanted to just check if there's any questions from the audience members here. And colleagues at the back, the technicians, you can let me know if there's any questions from the virtual platform. Is anybody who'd like to ask a question? No? And no questions from no questions. Okay. So we'll let DG to close out. I don't know if he has a question or if he just wants to add a comment, but you can close out and then I will close this very exciting session. Thanks, DG.
No, thanks very much. I just want to comment on the point made by Dr. Giorgio Rosinio around TB, and maybe make an offer to our partners for the convention. We've done some work on the TB vaccine. So what we could do, Dr. Msomi, the Center of Excellence based at Wits and Stellenbosch, they are doing clinical trials on the new vaccine. So if the audience would find this exciting, we would be more than happy to maybe bring them in so that we can get an update to see whether the target for Dr. Rosinio is closer than we think. So it's something that we could do. I think, if I'm not mistaken, including the mRNA hub is also looking at vaccines. So we could have maybe one of them. I'm again not pushing because I'm one of the major funders, but I think technically in the audience we find this quite exciting. So I just thought perhaps there's something we can keep in mind.
No, this is fantastic. I was hoping to see Dr. Msomi nodding his head vigorously. But this is very exciting. And as I pointed out, of course, there is the UN General Assembly high-level meeting on TB. So I think that this coincides quite beautifully with that. So I have an indication that there is a question from the floor and a question from the virtual platform. It's from the virtual platform. Okay, are you able to unmute the person so they can ask the question? Or is it, it's Dr. Rosinio. Okay, no, Dr. Rosinio, it's good to see you because we didn't have a visual previously. So now we know what you look like. Please go ahead and react.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you, DG. I think it's a great opportunity to talk. And I think we had in the organizing committee also for this session, for the next BioAfrica, a discussion around diagnostics and how innovation can really come from African countries. This great opportunity, and I'm sure Slashla will take this up, and we will, and Sia, and will put this with some prominence into the program. But my comment really, if you allow me, Chairperson, is really a little bit more broader into what you talk about market shaping. And I have been involved with the global, with the Foundation for Innovative New Diagnostics, we developed 5 new TB diagnostics in the 10 years I was the CEO there. And all of this, we have developed them, not only, well, mainly with, of course, Northern Diagnostic Company, including Cepheid, of course, with the first molecular diagnostic ever touching the public health sector in Africa. And so, you know, we had a little bit the same problem, thinking about market shaping. How do we bring this new innovation now and make them widely used in Africa? So just imagine today, GeneXpert has taken the place of sputum microscopy with more than 10 million cartridges sold per year, which is a huge market. So I want to come back to this because it's very important for me, 2 or 3 things about market shaping and how do we link this to African innovation. So let's imagine now that we have companies in Africa that come up with a new diagnostic, a new vaccine, or a new drug. Thought, developed, and manufactured in Africa. Now we want to have a market. And as somebody said, very rightly so, the most important thing is, you know, looking at Africa first market, which is very important. And certainly that should be the first target for anyone coming from Africa. But, you know, if you think about how the things happen today with innovation for Africa, first of all, you need to have a WHO approved product and has to be going through quite a long process of approval at WHO, and I don't want to go much into the details because I still have good friends there. So, but the other thing is we have the whole issue about GMP, and we have all the GMP according WHO, according FDA, very complicated, etc. But most importantly, most devastating is that we have a pre-qualification mechanism, which means that, you know, this has been invented by the big pharma to make sure that Indians and Chinese will have a lot of problem to pre-qualify, because what they pre-qualify is not only the product, is also the manufacturing side. So if they come there, they look, there is a crack on the cement outside, they will not pre-qualify. And then you have to wait another 5 years before you pre-qualify. So how do we imagine that something like this and simplify this in a mechanism that should be African? And I submit to humbly that, you know, we have the mechanism in Africa. First of all, we have the African CDC. The African CDC can qualify products, can say, yes, this product is good enough for the African market, number one. We have the ECA, the Economic Commission for Africa. We have a big market today in Africa. It's open to everyone. Now regulate that opening of that market for pharma products or for biotechnology products, including, in fact, for food security and all that other stuff, is something that should be negotiated between government like South Africa, which is a visionary government, and together with the ECA and the CDC, and thinking a little bit outside of the box about how we can do this. And then we have the AMA, as just Tumi was saying, you know, the AMA can regulate, can give us the opportunity to have a pre-qualification mechanism, which is an African pre-qualification mechanism for African Research Institute, for African manufacturer. So I think that if we have this as a vision for the next 4 or 5 years, it will be just good enough, mature enough for when we will finally be able to have an R&D in Africa that is capable of producing products manufactured in Africa. And that's, thank you very much.
No, I'm so glad that actually you brought it up. I left it out because it's, as you say, you know, we all have good friends in WHO, kind of becoming a very sticky subject. But let me just add to what you're saying by saying that indeed it is Africa's vision that AMA and our regulators will be able to provide that confidence to the world market ultimately of the quality of the product. However, I think that the reality is that we're still a ways away from that, and that WHO pre-qualification, fortunately or unfortunately, or however you want to think it, is still absolutely critical right now at this current stage until we are really able to stand up our mechanism. So you're quite correct when you talk about a period of about 5 to 10 years. It's very much, the next 5 to 10 years are going to be very much a watershed period, and it's going to be make or break. And, you know, when we engage the large procurers, the Gavis, the UNICEFs, etc., they are very quick to remind us about the issue of pre-qualification. So I think that as a continent, I think we do accept that this is an issue that we probably cannot sidestep right now at this stage. And the thing is that we must engage WHO to have a mechanism, a dispensation that prioritizes African product. They must come on board the agenda, and they must actually help us out to pre-qualify African products so that it can get out there in the market until we're at a point where we can do a pre-qualification or a qualification that satisfies the world market. So I think we are very much alive to the reality. We're not overly idealistic, but you're quite right about the vision. That is where we do need to take it. But really, the next couple of years is very, very watershed. Dr. Dumi?
Thank you. I mean, I think Jojo raises a very important point around this global procurement.
Yeah.
And actually last week I was at a meeting with one of the global procurers, I won't say who, but I was indeed challenging this requirement that they look at WHO pre-Q and then what they call stringent regulators, which I also challenge. And to the point that I made earlier, if you've got 5 regulators on the continent who are ML3,
Right.
why can you not rely on a decision that they made? So there is a meeting of the African regulators in Rwanda coming up in August, and this is one of the key priorities that we will be discussing. And WHO is part of this AMR, because it is important that the decision of an African regulator is considered in a procurement decision. Many of you may not know, but actually WHO PQ uses a number of our African assessors for decisions that they make. So we have the capability, and it's important and that we take charge. So I can say with certainty that this is a matter that African regulators are.
No, this is very encouraging to hear that you're pushing, because as I said earlier, a lot of the work that we do is really just pushing against preconceptions and, you know, mindsets, really. You know, it's very much part of what we do. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we all had the different speakers on all the statements that are being developed. The platform itself, Biotechnology provides a platform for all the issue of regulation and digital, which will be part of our discussion today. How do we in Africa prepare ourselves for accepting products, what we are for health or products, because that's the only platform we have to discuss. Biotech is there in the continent, and out there we have framework to discuss. So we provide the platform to discuss. I think we'll be able to bring those discussions later now when to Rwanda should we cover the problem. And our colleagues on the first memory, SMGB, and others, we need to focus on after that, be able to take the technology and for after development, might be hours from outside to do that. The manufacturer, but also to the advocates to talk the science and communicate to our people. We don't have something to do it. We want to have benefit of this. So the convention will be providing all the discussion on that.
No, fantastic. Well, this is a very good note to close on, that we've got this incredible platform that's coming up. Please remind us the dates again of the BioAfrica Convention.
The 6th convention is Durban, the ICC in South Africa, from the 1st to the 6th of September. And we hope everybody is there. We open for registration, www.bioafricaconvention.com or africabio.com.
Thank you so much. So let me close by repeating where you can register: www.bioafricaconvention.com. And of course, the social media platforms are also there: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at BioAfrica, with bio being capital letters, except for Instagram. Bio is small letters and it also has an underscore at the end. But I'm sure you can just Google BioAfrica and you will be able to find all of these handles. So with that, I would like to thank the DG and this eminent panel, a panel of speakers, innovators, experts, and as you can hear, very much agitators, some of them highly provocative, which is exactly what this continent needs. We don't need shy, timid people in the biotech sector. We need very, very strong advocates to ensure that we can really take our bold vision forward